Will you attack the villains? Author, Fu Zhang knows me. Introduction. Ji Qing's Shi is fearful and stupid, with nothing but a face. Once crossing, in order to save the world, she bound a strategy system. She wants to attack Shen Rongjiu, the villainous and beautiful villain in Xuanyunzong, so as to prevent him from destroying the world of cultivating immortals in the future. Ji Qingzhou has been single for 20 years, can he learn how to attack villains? Of course not. She started messing around with the tasks issued by the system and let it go. Shen Rongjiu was practicing her sword, and the sword was shining brightly on the snow. She should have stood by the side and applauded to show her admiration for the elder brother. As a result, she was busy eating cakes, and accidentally fed the cakes to Shen Rongjiu's blood-drinking sword. After she left, Shen Rongjiu raised the sword and shook it several times before letting the sword spit out the pastry. After Shen Rongjiu was injured, she accidentally discovered his old wounds. She should have shed tears to show her love for him. As a result, she squeezed for a long time but did not shed tears. She just stroked the wound and said dryly, "Brother, your tattoo is really cool." Shen Rongjiu was so angry with her that she was sick for 3 months. After finally having a chance to have a heart-to-heart talk with Shen Rongyu, she should have taken this opportunity to further her relationship. Ji Qingzhou overslept, and the next morning she brought breakfast to ask Shen Rongjiu if he wanted to eat with him. Shen Rongjiu, who was so sleepy after waiting all night, said, "Don't eat." Until the end, the orthodox sect was overthrown. Shen Rongjiu stepped on bones and blood, covered her eyes with one hand, covering her eyes with bright red eyes. Ji Qingzhou was extremely nervous. Is it my turn? Her long eyelashes trembled uneasy in his palm. She was about to explain her funeral to the system, but she didn't expect that Shen Rongjiu leaned over and her lips brushed against her ear. In the dark, his tone was low and paranoid. "Ji Qingzhou, it's already this time, can you be more serious when you attack me?" Highlight Tuowei Redemption. The heroine has a psychological barrier to be afraid of society, and the male protagonist redeems more female protagonists. Content tags, soft spot search keywords, protagonist, Ji Qingzhou, Shen Rongjiu supporting role, others are not important. Others, Bib at one sentence introduction, will the villains attack me? Conception, pursue the momentary light in the dark predicament. Ji Qingzhou took a beautiful smooth carrot from his pocket and stuffed it into the mouth of the donkey pulling the cart in front of the cart. She looked up at the sky and sighed. The donkey cart carrying her wobbled and looked like it was about to fall apart at any moment. Under the mountains, the mist is scattered, and there is a winding path like a veil wrapped around the waist of the green mountain, winding upwards, and the little donkey cart that Ji Qingzhou is sitting on is inlaid on the veil. Xuanyunzong, as the #1 orthodox sect in Yunzhou, is a holy place for people with a heart of Taoism, but Ji Qingzhou is the first one to participate in Xuanyunzong's 1centennial Ascension to Immortals conference by donkey cart. The reason for taking the donkey cart is very simple. Ji Qingzhou is poor, and the system she is bound to is useless. She can only use the money she saved after crossing to buy a smart little donkey, which can recognize the way to Xuanyunzong. Eating carrots can run. I said, "Do you really want me to do this?" Ji Qingzhou touched a bumpy carrot again, wiped it with his sleeve, and started to chew. There are so many beautiful fairies in the world of cultivating immortals, who are smarter than me. I'm so powerful, why did you bring me here? Host, at that time Shen Rongjiu affected the ghost energy of the earth veins, and the whole world would be destroyed by the ghost energy of the earth veins that collapsed. There are no living people in this world. I can only drag a living person from another world. There is no time to pick and choose. The system said to Ji Qingzhou, its voice was steady, like an emotionless machine. In fact, after understanding, Ji Qingzhou knows that this system is the embodiment of the poor self-help consciousness of the world, and it is indeed not human. She was actually quite unlucky. On an ordinary night, she drank a glass of milk and went to bed. When she woke up the next day, she lay on the ground without changing her pajamas, and a cold system sound came from her ears. Congratulations to the host for binding the strategy system. Please try to conquer the sick and delicate Shen Ronjiu, let him have care in the world of mortals, and help prevent the destruction of this world. Go to the doctor when you are sick, and drink more hot water. I am 23 years old and have never been in a relationship. I don't know how to strategy. After the host strategy is completed, you can return to the original world. Can't we go back now? Cannot. Then do it. According to the system, this sickly girl named Shen Ronjiu is the #1 villain who will destroy this world in the future, and the world of cultivating immortals that was once destroyed by him has a sense of self-help, and in a hurry, he casually grabs an unlucky guy from another world and comes here to attack he, as if he could not kill someone if he fell in love. Shen Ronjiu is currently lurking in the Xuanyun sect of the Zhendao sect as a glamorous elder brother, but there is no other information at all, and it is a trap to death. I'm sorry for the host, this world cannot obtain information about Shen Ronjiu, he cut off all information about his existence in this world. Your system doesn't seem to be very reliable. Ji Qingzhou came to a conclusion that this system is quite suitable for him. But host, you can go to Xuanyunzong now. The Xuanyunzong Ascension Conference is about to start once in 50 years. If you can become his fellow disciple and approach him, then the success rate of the strategy will be doubled. You mean going from 0.01% to 0.02%? Host, you are so optimistic. 0 multiplied by 0 is still 0. Ji Qingzhou scratched her head. She didn't quite understand why letting one person fall in love could prevent the destruction of the world. She had never been in love before, so she really couldn't understand the beauty of it. However, she can only go home if she completes the task. Ji Qingzhou can only bite the bullet and go. It is very unlucky for the system to pick her. Ji Qingzhou lay on his back on the pile of straw in the donkey cart, raised his head and looked at the blue sky. The sky was as clear as a mirror, and the soft clouds swayed slightly in the wind. Xuanyunzong is located in the center of Yunziu, stretching for 100,000 miles. The Immortal Ascension Conference, which occurs once every 50 years, was held at Yunshui Peak in the west. Xuanyunzong is hidden in the eyes of the world, so if you want to be qualified to worship Xuanyunzong, you must first find this fairyland, which is the first test. Ji Qingzhou thinks that she is a vulgar mortal, but she is lucky. After getting the system task, she saw the old donkey in the backyard of a certain donkey meat hot pot restaurant in the city. It was blindfolded and was still pulling the mill before it died. The fat cook with a big arm and a round waist held a kitchen knife with a gloomy light, and bargained with the old farmer who sold the donkey. It's so old, I slaughtered the customers and disliked the old meat, so I have to cook it with charcoal for a while. The old donkey was so frightened that Lamo moved quickly. Ji Qingzhou picked up the token to communicate with the system, a small mirror, and said to the system, I want to go to Xuanyunzong, we still need a means of transportation. A donkey, how could it take you to Xuanyunzong? The system objected. Ji Qingzhou still bought the donkey, why should she listen to the system? The money is hers, so she wants to ride the little donkey. Go, take me to Xuanyunzong. Ji Qingzhou bought a bag of carrots and patted the old donkey's neck, its fur was warm. Pulling the cart, the old donkey ran and actually ran towards Xuanyunzong. You must know that Xuanyunzong cannot be reached by ordinary means. Outside of its fairyland of 100,000 miles away, there is a formation barrier that confuses the eyes of the world. Those with good roots and celestial fate can see through this barrier with the help of fairy eyes. Those with powerful clans and connections can rely on intelligence to pass through this barrier. Ji Qingzhou has nothing, she just wants to ride a little donkey, because she has never ridden before in modern times. This old donkey, who has been blindfolded all his life, may be a potential immortal donkey, who actually saw through the formation barrier of Xuanyunzong, and brought Ji Qingzhou to the periphery of Xuanyunzong. Between the green hills outside Shuanyunzang's boundary, there are many mountains, and the clouds are lingering on the mountainside. This mountain road has not been stepped on for a long time. Ji Qingzhou fell asleep on the donkey cart, and when she woke up, the donkey had stopping in front of her, panting. There is a clear sound of lingling coming from the front, and white birds with beautiful tail feathers are singing on the branches. The blue stone steps go up, and the cold wind is facing you. It is a platform on the top of a cliff, and many immortal seekers gather on it. She had never seen such a big scene. Those who could reach Shuanyunzang were not ordinary people. She, the only ordinary person, was brought up by the fairy donkey. On the cliff, there are noble princesses sitting under a propped canopy, shouting in front and hugging behind, knights with swords clanking at their waists, and mysterious foreign people with white gauze masks. Everyone is radiant and energetic, as if the whole body is glowing. Ji Qingzhou stuffed the cooking utensils, tents, clothes, and other things he had used all the way into the big sack, unloaded the cart from the donkey cart, led the donkey in one hand, and walked up the blue stone steps with the sack in the other. She felt that she might not be here to participate in some ascension conference, she was here to pick up trash. Sleeping in the open all the way, the mountain road was windy and sandy, Ji Qingzhou's face was dirty, and the lowered hood covered most of it, not showing his appearance, only a pair of half-drooped eyes were exposed under the brim of the hat, very bright, like stars in the dark. Ji Qingzhou avoided the crowd, and sat on the side as if nothing had happened. Not far in front of him was a bottomless abyss. There seemed to be the sound of howling wind as he went up the cliff, crying like howling. She began to nibble on the remaining carrots, and if she fell off that cliff, she would have no chance to eat them when the time passed. At this time, there was a light snort in the distance, and he took a look at Ji Qingzhou at the beautiful woman sitting under the canopy, and said with a sneer, "This Shuanyunzang's Ascension to Immortal Conference is looking for someone who has roots and qualifications to cultivate immortals. Man, why even the beggars on the side of the road are here?" Ji Qingzhou guessed that she was talking about herself, but before she crossed over, she also had a decent job, 5 social insurances and 1 housing fund, and she could fish at work. It was all because of the system, and that Shen Rongjaiu, she was fallen into this situation. But she was stupid and couldn't speak. She just lowered her head and continued to feed the donkey carrots. "Hey, are you still dumb?" The woman looked at Ji Qingzhou and smiled. Her name is Chu Mingxiu, and she is the princess of a small country in the Yun's region. Even if she came to seek immortality, she brought many servants with her. She thought Ji Qingzhou was an eyesore, because it was hard for her to accept that such a down-and-out person could come to Shuanyunzang and stand on the same starting line as her. "I'm not dumb." Ji Qingzhou was finally willing to speak, and she raised her head slowly. "I'm immortal, and I couldn't come to the Immortal Ascension Conference with my own strength. This donkey brought me here." She didn't mean to be sarcastic at all, she mainly wanted to praise the donkey for being reliable, but her words hit Chu Mingxiu's painful feet, because she did not come to Shuanyunzang by her own strength, but by the strength of her family. Even flying up this cliff, she spent money to buy a priceless flying charm. "You mean I'm worse than a donkey?" Chu Mingxiu said loudly, "Do you know who I am? Donkeys can still be ridden." Ji Qingzhou said seriously, "Girl, I don't know who you are, you insulted me." Qiaming Swalai raised her brows angrily. Ji Qingzhou put her hands into her sleeves, a little at a loss. She didn't mean to insult Chu Mingxiu, but she was really not very good at talking, and she didn't have much emotional intelligence. She bowed her head and said, "Girl, I'm sorry, I didn't mean you can ride, I just said donkeys can ride, you can't." "That's right." Chu Mingxiu had never heard such vulgar words. "Rao, those who can come here are not ordinary people. They have all seen big winds and waves." After listening to their conversation, some people can't help but laugh out loud. "This ashen-faced little girl looks stupid and has a soft voice, but every word she says can irritate the other party. It cannot be said that her voice is simple and soft, her voice is beautiful, like soft filaments scratching the tips of her ears one by one. Her tone was very lazy, slow, and limp. It's like this, girl, you really don't want to compare with my donkey. I just bought it for 2 renminbi. I think you wear gold and silver, and your status is noble, so don't lower yourself like this. Ji Qingzhou was really anxious, she raised her head, finally she was willing to show her face in front of Chu Mingxiu. Ji Qingzhou looks good, this is the only comforting point for the system. Her face is exquisitely lined, like the most perfect artwork of creation. Her eyes are clear and pure black, with sparkles in them. When she lowers her eyes slightly, there is always something lovely meaning. At this time, she was facing Chu Mingxiu, with a pair of beautiful water eyes shining on her dirty face. Chu Mingxiu was stunned for a moment, she didn't expect the grey Ji Qingzhou to have such beautiful eyes. These eyes are so beautiful, like the shoal ocean under the sun, clear and clear, looking deeply, it seems a bit tempting magic. During the stalemate, there was a rustling wind from behind, and a sword light appeared on the cliff in the distance, as clear as snow, and a young man in white came with a sword. The sword wind under his feet swept across the clouds, and the soft white clouds were like lollying waves. He stepped on the clouds and waves, like a fairy falling down a cliff. The air wave he inadvertently swept over the canopy brought by Chu Mingxiu's attendants, and even Chu Mingxiu who was standing on the cliff staggered. Congratulations to the host, your target Shen Rongjia has appeared. The system said to Ji Qingzhou. Ji Qingzhou put the small mirror into her arms. She is well versed in fishing skills, as long as the system doesn't tell her to move, she won't move. The main reason is that she is not very good at communicating with people. She is afraid of saying or doing wrong things and being rejected by the target. As Shen Rongjia is a respected elder brother in Xuanyun sect, if there are important matters in the sect, the head of the sect will also assign some tasks to Shen Rongjia. For example, in today's Immortal Ascension Conference, capable immortal seekers have already flown over the cliff by their own strength and reached Yunshui Peak, while the second-level immortal seekers stayed on the cliff and waited for the people from Xuanyun sect to pick them up. Shen Rongjia took on the task of guiding the newcomers. Everyone's eyes were focused on Shen Rongjia. Standing behind the crowd, the short Ji Qingzhou couldn't see what he looked like at all. If it's too ugly, she won't be able to conquer it, Ji Qingzhou thought to himself. Shen Rongjia in front of the crowd closed his eyes, and a walnut-sized cloud boat appeared from between his wide sleeves. Then he pushed it with mana, and the cloud boat rose against the wind and turned into a large boat 5 feet long. The immortal seekers waiting here went up one by one. Ji Qingzhou couldn't bear to give up his old donkey, so he patted its head. 1 person and 1 donkey fell to the end and followed. At this time, Shen Rongjia was still standing on the cliff. After the crowd dispersed, Ji Qingzhou looked at him, and she finally saw what he looked like. When the system described Shen Rongjia to her, it described him as a human monster who slaughtered countless monks in the world of cultivators, and his sword was stained with blood. Ji Qingzhou thought that this person with a green face and long fangs had no human appearance, so he must be extremely cruel. His eyes fell on him. At this time, Shen Rongjia was standing tall, and in the mountain wind on the cliff, his big sleeves embroidered with light spirit immortals fluttered, as if he were exiled immortals. Shen Rongjia didn't look at Ji Qingzhou, his eyes looking at the mountains in the distance were extremely cold, like a layer of ice, covering the emotions deep in the eyes. Ji Qingzhou led the donkey to give herself courage. When she got closer, she saw Shen Rongjia's eyebrows and eyes clearly. His appearance was as perfect and cold as the cold jade buried under the ice for thousands of years, and it also had a jade-like lustrous texture. He is good-looking, and looks a little gentle, not fierce, but Ji Qingzhou always feels that there is a kind of awe-inspiring aura around him, making people afraid to approach him. Shen Rongjia is standing on the cliff right now, not looking at her at all. he is just quietly waiting for the last passenger on the cloud boat to board. Ji Qingzhou didn't know what to do. It wasn't that she wanted to talk to Shen Rongjie, it was just that she... Well, hello, can my donkey get on the boat? Ji Qingzhou asked Shen Rongjie seriously, and said the first sentence to his target. Shen Rongjie's eyes froze slightly. He heard Ji Qingzhou's words. Her voice was unique, and the words she said were also strange. Okay, come up. Shen Rongjie was unexpectedly good-natured, but he was still too lazy to look at Ji Qingzhou, and he wasn't even interested in such an exciting thing as a donkey participating in the Immortal Ascension Conference getting on a boat. Ji Qingzhou led the old donkey and sat at the end of the cloud boat. On her right was Chu Mingxiu, who had quarreled with her not long ago. The maid she brought was also regarded as an individual participating in the Immortal Ascension Conference and got the right to participate. Chance, which made her very depressed. When Ji Qingzhou led the old donkey and sat beside her, Chu Mingxiu became even more depressed. Why is your donkey here too? Sit far away. Chu Mingxiu squeezed in the direction of her maid. Ji Qingzhou took the initiative to sit at the end, keeping a distance from Chu Mingxiu. The carrots in her pocket were gone, and the old donkey was so tasty that she couldn't find anything else to do to hide her embarrassment. Ji Qingzhou is not used to crowded places, she swallowed, and continued to be in a daze. She looked at the fluffy clouds in the distance, and began to miss her soft quilt with cartoon cloud patterns printed on it. At this time, someone flew with a sword, and the light of the sword was as cold and gorgeous as snow, and his figure was rustling. Shen Rongjie flew to the bow of the cloud boat after all the immortal seekers had boarded the boat. His eyes are still looking straight ahead. Ji Qingzhou only sees his side face, his sharp jawline, high nose bridge, and long eyelashes shaking off the mountain mist. The figure carved on the cloud cliff is like a painting. However, her eyes did not follow Shen Rongjie. After Shen Rongjie Yujian left, she lowered her head, but other people looked at him one after another, with expressions of admiration in their eyes. He's so good-looking, like a real fairy. Chu Mingxiu said, is this Shen Rongjie, the elder brother of Xuanyun sect who is famous throughout Yunziu? I didn't expect him to be willing to come out to pick us ordinary people, so approachable. The arrogant and domineering little princess even called herself an ordinary person after meeting Shen Rongjie. Because of his existence, people can feel the difference between clouds and mud. He is a pure cloud, while others are mud on the ground. Ji Qingzhou looked down at the hem of her clothes. When she climbed the mountain, because of the bumpy road, she fell off the donkey cart. The hem of her clothes was stained with dust and wrinkled. She stretched out her hand and brushed the folds of the corners open a little. At this time, a system strategy mission appeared in the small mirror that Ji Qingzhou carried with him. The system has insufficient energy, please try to approach Shen Rongjie to obtain energy. Ji Qingzhou's position is the position farthest from Shen Rongjie on the entire cloud boat. She feels comfortable sitting here and doesn't want to move. She has always been a master of fooling, so her moved symbolically in the direction of Shen Rongjie, but she forgot that this direction was also in the direction of Chu Mingxiu. Originally, the old donkey she brought stood obediently at her feet, but now when she moved, the old donkey flicked its tail and moved towards Shen Rongjie, seeming more active than her. The donkey was old and ugly, and seeing the dirty old donkey approaching, Chu Mingxiu screamed, hid behind his maid, and screamed, Yingxiu. The maid named Yingxiu frightened the donkey with a wave of her hand. The silver ornaments on the sleeves gleamed, and the donkey, who had been blindfolded all his life, was frightened and stomped on the spot in panic. The wind on the cloud boat was strong, and the old donkey ran in panic, and was about to stumble and fall off the cloud boat. The cloud boat was descending from a cliff. Ji Qingzhou rushed up and hugged the donkey's neck, covered its eyes with her hands, and she patted its neck to comfort it. The old donkey accompanied her all the way, and she couldn't fall off. The old donkey was still flustered, the silver ornaments on his full sleeves were too dazzling, he didn't slow down for a while. Ji Qingzhou was caught off guard and kicked by the out-of-control donkey. Ji Qingzhou's balance was not very good. She always felt that she was a person with weak limbs, so when the old donkey kicked her like this, Yunzhou's protective formation did not support her, and she was directly kicked off the Yunzhou. Yunzhou flew at an extremely high altitude, and the feeling of weightlessness spread from the chest to the brain. Ji Qingzhou was so frightened that she couldn't speak. She could only close her eyes tightly, and pulled her hands in midair, trying to find a support that she could hold on to. Ji Qingzhou fell down, and the useless system panicked. "Host, what should I do? Host, I can't save you even if you haven't completed the task." She failed to answer the system, her lips trembled in horror, as if drowning in despair. She really felt the fear of death. Ji Qingzhou's falling speed became faster and faster, until she heard the rustling wind in her ears, like a bird flapping its wings and gliding on the sea. Due to the free fall, her back was arched, and her hands tried to reach up, looking for support. At this time, Shen Rongjie held her hand. The snowy longsword under his feet seemed to break through misty clouds. He wrapped Ji Qingzhou's waist with one hand, but she did not feel the tenderness in his palm. Temperature. All this happened in a blink of an eye, and the group of immortal seekers on the cloud boat realized what had happened, and retreated one after another. Chu Mingxiu and her maid Yingxiu had already panicked, and no one expected such a thing to happen. Everything, all in a daze. And Shen Rongjie has already flown forward to save people. His task is to bring these immortal seekers to Yunshui Peak safely, so naturally no one will be lost in the middle. With all his might, he pulled Ji Qingzhou into his arms. Ji Qingzhou's body is light, and she herself is too quiet. After falling into the cloud boat, she was frightened and stupid. She just looked dumbfounded and didn't know how to yell. At this time, she came back to her senses, and threw herself into Shen Rongjie's arms. A silver light flashed in front of her eyes. It was the pattern on Shen Rongjie's skirt. The slender petals, with a light blue color, seemed to melt into the moonlight, was epiphyllum, the most is pure and flawless. She sniffed, and smelled the pleasant fragrance of Shen Rongjie's body, which was very deep and very light, mixed with the alluring charm and the clean and dust-free coolness. Ji Qingzhou thought it was some kind of special floral fragrance, but after a long time, she realized that it was the bone-penetrating fragrance of blood and flesh, bones and souls that had killed thousands of people. Her hand was waving wildly in midair, trying to find a support, but after being dragged into Shen Rongjie's arms, her hand touched his shoulder. She should have clung to him tightly, her palm against her shoulder, like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. But after Ji Qingzhou confirmed his safety, he bent his fingers and slowly closed his hands into fists. She didn't grab him. In a daze, Shen Rongjie had carried her back to the cloud boat. She was thrown on the deck by him, and landed smoothly. It was only at this time that Ji Qingzhou came back to his senses. Shen Rongjie had never touched her since he rescued her. When he shot, a small air current flowed everywhere that touched her skin. An invisible air barrier separates the two of them. She didn't take it seriously, just patted the dust off her hands, and stammered a thank you. The old donkey standing still at the stern calmed down, stepped happily on all fours, and ran to look for her. Ji Qingzhou still wanted to sit back, so he prepared to walk towards the original place. As soon as she took a step, she was held down by Shen Rongjie with one hand, and there was still an invisible barrier between his palm and her shoulder. "The end of the cloud boat is broken, I'll go and see, you stay here," Shen Rongjie said. His voice was pleasant, like a cool spring. Ji Qingzhou didn't intend to appreciate the beauty of his voice. She found that Shen Rongjie's tone of voice was special, although it sounded gentle and soft, which was quite in line with the big martial brother personality, but his tone was not mixed with any emotion. Everyone present, whether shocked or fearful, had ordinary human emotions, only he said this sentence as if to complete a certain procedure. He didn't care about the life of the immortal seeker on the cloud boat, he just received a mission and had to complete it. This is the real task person, unlike her, who is bound to a system and still fishes. Ji Qingzhou sat down, touched the old donkey's neck, and thought to himself. Shen Rongjaihu checked the gap in the protective formation at the end of the cloud boat and repaired it. Chu Mingxiu and her maid Ying Xiao shivered in the stern, and couldn't help explaining, the beast she brought was too dirty, so she drove it away. Who asked her to save it, and who knows the protective array at the stern? The law is broken. Shen Rongjaihu ignored them. After repairing the formation, he returned to Yunzhou's head with his sword. This little farce was over. As for the gap in the protective formation on Yunzhou, it was not something he wanted to investigate. Ji Qingzhou lowered his hair in a daze. Shen Rongjaihu walked in front of her, his robes that dragged the floor were not stained with dust, he was lifted by the light air current, as comfortable as a fairy. Shen Rongjaihu sat on her right side, and a tall shadow shrouded it. The system excitedly said, "Congratulations to the host, you have successfully completed the first mission. You have successfully approached Shen Rongjaihu. The energy I replenished can last for 10 days for the time being." Ji Qingzhou twisted her sleeves, she didn't know what to do, even though Shen Rongjaihu was sitting not far from her, she didn't even have the courage to start a conversation. It's all because the system made him too fierce. Now she is afraid that he will kill her. Ji Qingzhou admits that she is a serious social fear, and now she is too embarrassed to even look at Shen Rongjaihu. Shen Rongjaihu drove the cloud boat steadily, and they arrived at Yunshui Peak in a short time, and another group of immortal seekers who arrived first were already waiting here. They are immortal seekers who fly across the abyss with their own strength. This is the group of elites who participated in the Ascension to Immortal Conference, and the group on their cloud boat can only be regarded as stepping stones at best. When getting off the cloud boat, Ji Qingzhou's old donkey was not very well behaved, his hoof was crooked, and he stepped on Shen Rongjaihu's foot. Shen Rongjaihu didn't hide, because the old donkey couldn't touch him, and the airflow on his feet blocked the donkey's hooves. Ji Qingzhou gasped, she hugged the old donkey's neck and dragged her back. The donkey has a stubborn temper, and Ji Qingzhou had a hard time hugging it. Shen Rongjaihu finally looked at her, mainly because her donkey was so eye-catching. Ji Qingzhou hugged the old donkey's neck and stared blankly at Shen Rongjaihu. Shen Rongjaihu's eyelashes drooped slightly, and his gaze only glanced at Ji Qingzhou for a moment, and then his fingertips shimmered, flashing a very faint blue halo, and a spell was written by him, and the spell became because of the shape of the rope. He threw it to Ji Qingzhou. Ji Qingzhou took it subconsciously, she stood still, Yunzhou changed back to the size of a walnut, and Shen Rongjaihu put it into his sleeve, and he left. Holding the rope in her hand, she asked the system, "He wants me to kill myself with this rope." After hearing Ji Qingzhou's words, the system wanted to punch her right now. This should be a simple spirit control rope. Shen Rongjaihu wrote the spell of controlling spirit beasts into the spell. "Your donkey is too stupid. He asked you to take care of it." The system explained to Ji Qingzhou. Perhaps making a lingsuo is just a matter of moving fingers for Shen Rongjaihu, but this is the first gift Ji Qingzhou received after coming to this world. She didn't put a rope on the old donkey. Although this guy was too stubborn, he had been blindfolded and tied a rope all his life. Ji Qingzhou couldn't do anything to put another rope on it. Ji Qingzhou put away the spirit control rope that Shen Rongjaihu gave her, and put it in the small purse that she carried with her. In the purse was the savings she had saved after she came to this world. It cost 2 cents to buy a donkey, and she had 3 money. She walked slowly towards the crowd. The old donkey was carrying her luggage on the road. One person and one donkey were incompatible with the surrounding environment. In Yunshui Peak, the crown of the green pine tree is fluffy, painted with a dark green color, full of vitality under the bright sunlight. The mountains and rocks are scattered, and there are waterfalls flowing from the top of the mountain, converging in the wide lake below the mountain. The sun shines like gold, coating the surface of the lake with a dazzling outline. The Immortal Ascension Conference is a ceremony for the Xuanyun sect to select new disciples every 50 years. In the Immortal Ascension Conference, disciples with excellent temperament and roots are selected to get started. Ji Qingzhou didn't know who gave the system the confidence to make it think that she could pass this Immortal Assembly. But if she doesn't pass the Immortal Ascension Conference, she won't be able to join Xuanyunzong, she won't be able to get close to Shen Ronjiu, the energy of this system is exhausted, and she and the system will die together. Helpless, Ji Qingzhou could only think of ways to work hard. The place where she stands is neither far nor close to the crowd, neither blending into the crowd nor drifting away from them. The immortal seekers here are automatically divided into two groups, and the immortal seekers who just took the cloud boat naturally, they were lower class people, and those who arrived at Yunshui Peak first were descendants of immortal cultivating families. If the immortal seekers I saw on the cloud cliff just now were bright jewels clustered together, then the other group looked like real immortals, they were the bright moon hanging in the sky, and among the children of the immortal cultivating family, there was one person who was extremely dazzling. Standing there, she seemed to be able to attract everyone's attention, with a scorching beauty like a scorching sun. Meng Yalan stood in the center of the crowd, her black hair was tied behind her head, without any excess, her red and white clothes set off her neat figure, she was not afraid of the appearance of the crowd, her probing and envious eyes were like fish in water, she take a bath in it and feel at ease. Ji Qingzhou's feet moved lazily, she was not interested in others, she was thinking when she could sit down and have a rest, her feet were almost numb here. After Shen Ronjiu took the immortal seekers into Shuiyun Peak, he returned to the elders of the sect. The Xuanyun sect only sent 2 elders to preside over the immortal seeking meeting. Due to his special status, Shen Ronjiu stood at the 2 elders of Shuiyun Peak. In front of the elders, his posture was neither humble nor overbearing. Among them, Zhang Qunqi, the elder in charge of Shuiyun Peak, said to Shen Ronjiu jokingly, "The girl didn't use your spirit control rope." N. Shen Ronjiu responded lightly, his voice still distant, and he handed the yunzhou back to Zhang Qunqi. "There is a problem with the protective formation on the cloud boat, and that girl is also unlucky. From my point of view, she doesn't have a trace of immortality, just like a dull piece of wood. Maybe it's because of her donkey that she can get here." Zhang Qian the guest played with the cloud boat in his hand and said with a smile. "The place where they are is a large-scale formation hanging above Yunshui Peak. This formation is like a huge disk, relying on the upper space of Shuiyun Peak, and the immortal seekers under the formation look up. Can only see the sky full of white clouds. Ronjiu, you can go too." Zhang Qunqi said to Shen Ronjiu, "Back then you brought the token of the real person Yuanwu to prove that you were a disciple of the real person, and you were the only descendant of the Dongshan royal family. I keep you in the sect, but there are rules in the sect that cannot be violated, and you still have to go through this immortal meeting." Shen Ronjiu closed his eyes and responded, "He is a very special existence in the Xuanyun sect. Back then he came to Xuanyun sect as his disciple holding the token of Master Yuanwu. Shida Ning, so even if he is the head of Xuanyun sect, he should be called senior brother." He flew down with the sword, and the landing position was a little close to where Ji Qingzhou was, and they were both separated from the crowd. Shen Ronjiu didn't have to stand near Ji Qingzhou, the main reason was that her position was too precise, not far from the crowd, so she could observe all the movements, but she wouldn't blend into the annoying excitement of the crowd. At this time, Ji Qingzhou was still lowering his head to observe the pattern of pebbles on the lake beach. Shen Ronjiu landed lightly, but his tall shadow shrouded him. Ji Qingzhou didn't raise his head, but politely moved aside to give him a little seat. But what kind of person Shen Ronjiu is, all the immortal seekers present who know the inside story know that Shen Ronjiu, who has worshipped Xuanyunzong for more than 30 years, has not yet gone through the procedures of the immortal assembly, so they know that Shen Ronjiu will walk with them on this journey of seeking immortality. All looked over. Ji Qingzhou sharply raised her head, the hair under her black hood was blown down a little by the wind, fluttering lightly on her cheeks, tickling her a bit. Although she knew that those people were looking at Shen Rongjie, she still led the old donkey back. She was not used to the sight of so many people, it was like a spotlight, bright and painful. Where can she hide? There is only one shelter for now. Ji Qingzhou cleverly hid behind Shen Rongjie. She clearly heard her system sigh helplessly. Maybe Shen Rongjie noticed her, or maybe he didn't care about her at all. In short, he stood still without moving, and the pure white cloth on his shoulders looked like snow piled up on the mountains. At this moment, Meng Yalan from the immortal cultivation family also turned her head and stared in Shen Rongjie's direction. She saw the corner of Ji Qingswo's black clothes hiding behind Shen Rongjie, and didn't notice her. Meng Yalan, the eldest lady of Chongting Meng's family, is very arrogant. She doesn't even pay attention to Shen Rongjie. Just because of curiosity, Meng Yalan looked away, and went to do her own business. At this time, Zhang Qunqi, the elder of Yun Shui Peak who was prepared as the host of the immortal meeting, had already flown down from the clouds. He looked at all the immortal seekers present with a smile, with a gentle posture and a handsome expression on his handsome face. What is more important is the bearing of Dazong men. Now that all of you are here, let's start this meeting of seeking immortality. Where you are not considered to have fully entered the Xuanyun sect, and it is very easy to say that you have the qualifications to worship my Xuanyun sect. It's simple, you just need to find the real entrance to Yun Shui Peak of Xuanyunzong. Zhang Qunqi said with a smile. After finishing speaking, there was a thick fog behind him embracing the mountains and forests, covering the green pine mountains and rocks. Everything around him was immersed in the thick fog, leaving only a lake in front of him. The lake was wide, and there was only a hazy golden light at the end of his line of sight. It seems that this lake is the first test. Ji Qingzhou saw that many immortal seekers walked into the lake without hesitation, but the lake water was weird, and when someone stepped into it, his complexion became painful, as if he couldn't bear the immersion in the lake water. In this lake, there is the holy water of Jianshan that I collected, which has the effect of washing away the dirt of the body. The more people with excellent bones, the less they will be affected by this lake. If a real mortal enters the water, even flesh and blood will be destroyed. Be melted away. The elder Zhang Qunqi of Yun Shui Peak has returned to the main hall of the sect, and there are elders who want to accept disciples in this immortal meeting sitting here. In front of them, there is a huge water mirror with ripples on it, reflecting the immortal seekers on Jianshan Lake. Above the Jianshan Lake, the white bird that was squatting on the branch and singing on the cloud cliff just now flew above everyone's heads. Various images flashed in its eyes, providing vision for the elders in the main hall of the sect. With our Xuanyunzong's obscuring formation, it is reasonable that no complete mortal will come over, but Zhang Qunqi pointed to Ji Qingzhou who was standing on the shore. Ji Qingzhou was hiding behind Shen Rongjie at this time. Shen Rongjie took 2 steps forward, and she also moved 2 steps. Is the energy charged enough? Ji Qingzhou and the system muttered, can it last for the next 50 years? I don't think I can go down this lake. That's not enough. The system complained, don't be afraid, just give it a try. Ji Qingzhou is not stupid, she has long noticed that some people will be hurt by the lake water if they go down, and most of the people who are not used to the lake water are those lower-level immortal seekers who came here on a cloud boat. Of course, there are exceptions in that group of people. It was Chu Minglu who scared her old donkey on the cloud boat and her maid Yingziu. They jumped into the water with graceful figures and postures enjoying themselves. There are excellent fairy bones. Chu Minglu noticed that Ji Qingzhou was hesitating on the shore, and she smiled contemptuously at her. Sure enough, the beggar who came here by luck showed his true colors in front of the mirror like Jianshan Lake. However, under her smug smile, she clenched her teeth tightly, clearly enduring the pain. The only one who didn't take Jianhe water seriously at all was Meng Yalan, who shuttled gracefully through the lake, looking for clues buried at the bottom of the lake. Everyone went down, Only Shen Rongjie and Ji Qingzhou remained, and Shen Rongjie entered the lake with a calm posture. Ji Qingzhou didn't want to follow him into the lake, so she just sat down by the lake and swayed. The Xuanyunzong elders who observed the situation here breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she has self-knowledge and knows that she came here by mistake. Zhang Qunqi turned his head and told his disciples, "You go to Jianshan Lake. It's not easy for the little girl to come here. Give her some money to go back and send her down the mountain." Even though the system was talking and talking, Ji Qingzhou refused to move. She was afraid of pain and knew how much she weighed, so she refused to go to the water to suffer. However, beside Ji Qingzhou, there is obviously a real king. The old donkey who was standing obediently beside Ji Qingzhou lost control again. It seemed to be looking at the golden light in the water for fun, and jumped straight into the lake. Ji Qingzhou jumped straight up from the ground, and the old donkey was not only an old donkey, but also 2 coins, so she chased after him. Mau Mau. Ji Qingzhou called it, "This donkey has a name." Mau Mau didn't listen to her at all. In fact, the donkey probably never regarded Ji Qingzhou as its master. It rushed into the lake. Ji Qingzhou was afraid that it would get hurt, so he also rushed towards it. The disciples guarding the shore rushed over in shock. They thought Ji Qingzhou couldn't bear the water of Jianshan Lake. However, after Ji Qingzhou plunged into the water, she only felt the cool lake water enveloping her body. She shivered, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. It doesn't seem to be particularly painful. She pushed Mau Mau to the shore, and the Xuanyun sect disciples on the shore brought Mau Mau up. It was okay to see Ji Qingzhou, but they took Mau Mau away and ignored her. At this time, Ji Qingzhou was surprised that he was not afraid of the lake water. Because the golden light on the lake obscured her sight, Ji Qingzhou pretended not to see the surprised eyes around her, and only walked towards the center of the lake. She knew that there was a clue at the bottom of the lake to find the real entrance of Yunshui Peak. She walked in the same direction as Shen Rongjie. After all, they entered the water in the same direction. At this time, Shen Rongjie only exposed his shoulders on the surface of the water. The white satin and light gauze decorated on the shoulders were soaked in water and scattered all over his body, like different colored paints that had bloomed in the water. Ji Qingzhou thought about getting closer to him now to give the system some energy, so he walked there slowly. Until she tiptoed and couldn't reach the bottom of the lake, she suddenly realized something. Yes, she may not be afraid of Jianhe water for some inexplicable reason. But, she can't swim. Because the water was too deep, Ji Qingzhou jumped up in the water. At this time, she was only half a foot away from Shen Rongjie. Ji Qingzhou was splashing about in the water. She didn't know how to swim, and she didn't have much strength in her limbs. She clearly felt that she tried her best to splash the water to float herself up, but it didn't help. Because of her nervousness, she spit out all the air in her chest, her body became heavier and heavier, and the lake water covered her head. No one paid attention to the changes that happened here, because no one would have guessed that there are still people in Jianshan Lake who can't swim. The lake is wide, and the monks who entered the water in the distance have already dived into the water to find clues. The immortal seekers in the lake are all competitors, and no one will come to help Ji Qingzhou. Even the disciple of Xuanyun sect who wanted to rush over to grab her just now, after saving her donkey Mau Mau, led Mau Mau aside to play with it, and didn't pay attention to it at all. Only Shen Rongjie found out that Ji Qingzhou was drowning. The sun was shining like gold, his body was fixed not far from Ji Qingzhou, and he didn't move. Ji Qingzhou is a very quiet person. Even though she was drowning, she sank and tried her best to get up, but she didn't yell or ask for help. The lake water was icy cold, and Ji Qingzhou felt that her limbs were frozen in the water, and her paddling was extremely stiff. Because of the lack of oxygen, her originally held breath relaxed, and she choked on water. The nasal cavity seemed to be blocked by something, and it hurt. Ji Qingzhou couldn't even hear the system's broken thoughts. She is just an ordinary person, but who is Shen Rongjie? It is the most evil existence in this world. She bound the system and wanted to get close to him. It seemed like an easy task, but she actually went up there. The road was full of dangers, and any small accident could kill her. Ji Qingzhou was still waving her arms as hard as she could, but she didn't know how to swim, and such movements would only make her sink further. She took another sip of water, and the cold lake water poured into her chest, and she sank straight down still without the intention of calling for help from others. As long as Ji Qingzhou struggled, Shen Rongjie observed her for a long time. When Ji Qingzhou sank slowly, he slightly raised his chin. There was no emotion in his eyes, but a probing look. Even if Ji Qingzhou just drowned in front of him like this, it has nothing to do with him. It is clear that she is overreaching, and even a mortal wants to ascend to the rank of seeking immortality. However, Ji Qingzhou was surprisingly silent. Shen Rongjie had seen people floating in the sea of blood. In the water filled with blood, there were people with injured limbs who wanted to climb out of the sea of blood. Blood is still bubbling, and his vitality is constantly being lost, but he will still try his best to pull all the things around him that he can get. If it is someone else, he will pull others under him as a foothold. The struggle before dying is the most interesting, and Shen Rongjie likes to watch it. Ji Qingzhou is extremely boring, like a dead wood, and she will not lose control and go crazy, showing her ugly appearance with her sword edge across every fragile flesh and blood meridian in his body. It's not that she doesn't want to live, it's just that she tries her best, but she only shrinks in her own world. In her world, there is no other people, only herself. Ji Qingzhou closed her eyes. She thought, I'm really sorry for this system, if only it could find someone more capable. Her hands and feet were as heavy as lead, and she was wrapped in the cold lake water, like a flowing cocoon. Until a big palm embraced the back of her head, the temperature of his fingers was colder than the lake water, and Shen Rongjie's sleeve robe swung in the clear lake water, like a dry flower unfolding. He dragged Ji Qingzhou up to the surface of the lake. In Jianshan Lake, in order to detect the fairy bone of the seeker, all spells could not be used, so the airflow between Shen Rongjie's fingertips also disappeared. Skin to skin, touching without gaps, under Shen Rongjie's fingertips, are her pulsating blood vessels, pulsating. There was a sound of water. Ji Qingzhou's hood drooped down, soaked in water, and hung heavily on her back, and the cheeks stained by the wind, food and sleep along the way were also washed by the water of Jianshan Lake. Her long eyelashes were stained with water in embarrassment, and her slightly squinted eyes had a clear light. The system is right, she is indeed very good looking, but Ji Qingzhou magically has the ability of I don't know I'm pretty. As long as she wants to hide, no one will notice her, nor will she pay attention her looks. Appearance is not only related to simple beauty and ugliness, but also affected by this person's temperament. For example, Meng Yalan, the eldest lady of the Meng family that Ji Qingzhou noticed on the lakeside just now, assuming that the girl has an ordinary appearance, but she stands in front of others. Bright and atmospheric, able to attract everyone's attention. Ji Qingzhou is more like a small flower that occasionally grows when a ray of skylight leaks from the skylight in the basement. It is extremely delicate, but extremely inconspicuous. Shen Rongjie patted her on the back, and Ji Qingzhou spat out the lake water in his chest, which made her feel better, and she regained consciousness. She stared blankly at Shen Rongjie in front of her. She didn't expect that he saved her. One day after coming to Xuanyunzong, this legendary villain actually saved her twice? Ji Qingzhou suspects that she is dreaming, but the continuous filling of energy in the system tells her that everything that happened just now is a fact. Because the system was absorbing energy just now, it excitedly told Ji Qingzhou, "Host, you can find a way to post more next time, so that I will be able to unlock my first function soon." Ji Qingzhou didn't answer the system's words, because Shen Rongjie was still holding her arm, and only relying on him, she didn't sink any further. At this time, the white bird that was constantly flying around the Jianshan lake to provide a view also flew here. It spread its wings, lowered its gliding height, schemed over the water, and gave Ji Qingzhou and Shen Rongjaihu a close-up. On the golden Jianshan lake, Shen Rongjaihu quietly watched Ji Qingzhou, but Ji Qingzhou didn't even dare to look at him, her eyes avoided and drifted elsewhere. In the main hall of Xuanyun sect, the elders who saw this scene were all taken aback. Is she drowning just now? This is not afraid of even the water of Jianshan lake, but she can't swim. Zhang Qunqi asked in surprise. Fortunately, Rongjaihu is here, otherwise, if a mortal dies in Jianshan lake, if the master returns, we will definitely be scolded. Another elder sighed, but I saw her clearly without a trace of fairy bones. Why? I don't know, this girl is too weird. Zhang Qunqi looked into Ji Qingzhuo's eyes. He has seen a lot. It was so beautiful that he couldn't find a single flaw, but this was the first time he had seen it. It's strange, even though she was good-looking, people still couldn't keep their eyes on her, Zhang Qunqi thought so. Ji Qingzhou was still in a stalemate with Shen Rongjaihu. She opened her mouth and thank you for saving me. Shen Rongjaihu let go, and Ji Qingzhou immediately sank like a weight. She was wearing a lot of clothes, which pulled her down. He grabbed her arm again. Ji Qingzhou was extremely nervous, and the wet clothes pressed against her body, wrapping her. She didn't have the courage to look at Shen Rongjaihu, her eyes moved elsewhere. Ji Qingzhou noticed Shen Rongjaihu's hand hanging by his side. The lake water was so clear that if he looked carefully, he could see the underwater situation clearly. He held her arm with one hand, and under the sleeve robe on the other side was a tightly clenched hand. He was not afraid of pain, but there was still a physiological reaction. Shen Rongjaihu's knuckles turned white, obviously in extreme pain, but his face was still calm, with no trace of pain showing. Even though he came here with the token of Deneng Yuanwu, the senior of Xuanyunzong, and has become the well-known senior brother Shen of Xuanyunzong in the past few decades, Jianshan Hushui still will not tolerate him. Looking at mountains and lakes, taking water as a mirror, can clearly illuminate everyone. Shen Rongjaihu is the future villain who sneaked into Xuanyunzong. The fairy bones are dust-free and pure, but how could he have them? When he entered here, it was like entering a boiling cauldron, and he was suffering bone-biting pain all the time. And he was still in the mood to stay and appreciate Ji Qingzhuo's struggle before his death. He was just curious. Ji Qingzhou guessed that he was enduring the pain, but what could she do? She seemed to have to tell him to drink more hot water. There is still a distance from the other side here, and many immortal seekers who can persevere are about to come to the other side. The white bird recording the situation is still here. It is curious that the two last people Shen Rongjaihu fed it with fairy fruits when they were in Xuanyunzong. It remembers it very clearly. Seeing that the white bird did not retreat, Shen Rongjaihu could only ask Ji Qingzhou, do you want to go back or go to the other side? Now that she has the opportunity, Ji Qingzhou will not give up. She said to Shen Rongjaihu, can I go to the opposite side? Let's hurry up. Because Shen Rongjaihu's hand hanging by his side was still trembling because of the pain, but his hand holding her arm was as hard as some kind of carved jade. Shen Rongjaihu dragged her to the opposite bank, the bank of Jianshan Lake, which was a milky white mist, with occasional wisps of crimson drifting through inside, like peach petals. The real entrance to Shuyun Peak was hidden behind the mist. At the bottom of Jianshan Lake just now, there are many map fragments scattered. If you can endure the washing of the lake, you can pick up clues at the bottom of the lake, and you can find your way even in the mist. Ji Qingzhou doesn't know how to swim, and Shen Rongjaihu doesn't know how to help her find it. She wants to enter the mist of peach blossoms now, so she can only look for the direction randomly. After she went ashore, Shen Rongjaihu turned around and went to the bottom of Jianshan Lake to search for clues on the map. Ji Qingzhuo's guess was right, he didn't have any bones, so if he wanted to find the exit in the mist of peach blossoms, he could only use find all the map fragments. There was a shining formation on the shore. Ji Qingzhou walked in, the water soaked all over her body was dried by the formation, and even the sound of wind and dust that brought her to Swan was washed away. Her slightly drooping her cheeks have delicate and beautiful outlines, and even humble clothes can't hide her complexion. At this time, Chu Mingxiu, who had searched for a long time in the lake and only found 2 maps, came ashore, and her maid Yingxiu also followed her step by step. The 2 princesses and maids of the small country in Yunxiu were also miraculous. They all have a good relationship. Ji Qingzhou turned her back to them. When she entered the water, Chu Mingxiu hadn't paid attention to her. When she saw Ji Qingzhou's back, Chu Mingxiu was startled. She couldn't believe that Ji Qingzhou could come up and he was worse than them. Quick, she is clearly a dull mortal. Little beggar! She called, how did you get here? Ji Qingzhou didn't answer her, because she was not called a little beggar, she just lowered her head and silently adjusted her robe. She was thinking, Shen Rongjia went into the water again, how much pain did he have? If it weren't for her, would Shen Rongjia spend less time soaking in Jianshan Lake? She was thinking about her own affairs and was waiting to communicate with the system when Chu Mingxiu had already ordered her maid Yingxiu to come forward. Our princess asked you something, little beggar. Yingxiu patted Ji Qingzhou's shoulder heavily. Ah! Ji Qingzhou came back to his senses, turned around, took off her hood, and washed off the dirt on her face, revealing only her fair face. Ji Qingzhou turned his head and met the gaze of the maid Yingxiu. In the daytime sunlight, her porcelain white face is like a priceless work of art. Under the perfectly lined eyes, the long eyelashes are slightly drooping. She seems to be indifferent to everything. She is so beautiful that she is clear and straightforward. Rao Yingxiu used to be a maid in the palace and had seen countless beauties. The moment she saw Ji Qingzhou, she was shocked for a moment. How did I come here? Why did I tell you? Ji Qingzhou's tone was slightly puzzled. If she had swam here by herself, she would not hesitate to share her method of getting here at this time, but it is a bit embarrassing to say that she was brought here by Shen Rongjia. Ji Qingzhou was embarrassed to say. Our princess asks you something, don't be ignorant. Although Ji Qingzhou's tone was soft, Yingxiu still thought she was provocative. At this time, Chu Mingxiu came forward, and was about to question Ji Qingzhou about the method to get to the other side, and saw Ji Qingzhou's face. You! The little beggar! The 3 words little beggar can't be said at all, facing Ji Qingzhou's face, no matter how blind she is, she can't call her a little beggar again. You're immortal, why are you here? Chu Mingxiu was dazed by Ji Qingzhou's appearance, she froze for a moment before continuing. Although Chu Mingxiu has a bit of fairy fate, her aptitude is not top-notch, so she also felt pain all over her body during the second half of her swim in Jianshan Lake. Even if she is like this, why didn't this little beggar be swallowed by Jianshan Lake? I just came here. It doesn't seem to make any sense to ask me why I came here. Ji Qingzhou walked out of the cleansing formation. She ignored the 2 people and was just thinking about the next move. She can't swim, and Jianshan Lake can't go down anymore. If there is no map, will it be dangerous to enter the mist of peach blossoms rashly? Anyway, since the system told her to go, she can just go as she pleases. Did you cheat? Chu Mingxiu chased after her, and continued to ask. She didn't believe that Ji Qingzhou could withstand Jianshan Lake. Yes. Ji Qingzhou admitted honestly, because strictly speaking, she didn't swim here by herself. Is this how your Swanyan sect selects new disciples? Chu Mingxiu said to the Swanyan sect disciple who was guarding the bank. The disciples of Swanyan sect here watched Ji Qingzhou being brought up by Shen Rongjia. Originally, the purpose of setting up Jianshan Lake was to test the bones and hearts of immortal seekers. Can swim question, as long as Ji Qingzhou can withstand the washing of Jianshan Lake, then she will pass this test, so they did not raise any objections. girls, she's fine. The Xuanyun sect disciple nodded to Chu Mingxiu, she just can't swim. Chu Mingxiu was taken aback for a moment, and Ji Qingzhou had already run to the shore, because she still remembered a figure on the other side. Mao Mao, who was originally pushed to the shore by her, was standing on the opposite bank. It seemed to be looking at Ji Qingzhou, but in fact she was not in its sight. It had been blindfolded all its life and its eyesight was not very good. Mao Mao stepped into Jianshan Lake while others were not paying attention. Here Chu Mingxiu was still thinking about how Ji Qingzhou got here, while over there Mao Mao had already swam over from the opposite bank when no one noticed. Ji Qingzhou and Chu Mingxiu stood awkwardly on the shore, and the two had a strange tacit understanding at this moment. She is not as good as a donkey? Mao Mao was contented in the water. Ji Qingzhou felt a little regretful. If he had known it would not be afraid, he should have rowed it over with a straight face from the beginning. Shen Rongjaiho collected all the map fragments, and when he went ashore, he happened to run into Mao Mao. The old donkey swam towards him. Shen Rongjaiho had never seen a donkey that could swim, so he took a second look at it. At this moment, Ji Qingzhou jumped into his sight. She hugged Mao Mao's neck. This donkey accompanied her all the way, now it can come here. It's really great. After Shen Rongjaiho came ashore, he didn't need to go into the cleansing formation, the water stains all over his body had been washed away by the spell he cast, and now he was still clean and white, with a clean appearance. Ji Qingzhou patted Mao Mao's neck, and then saw his hand hanging by his side. His fingertips turned white, not because he had been soaking in the water for too long, but because of the continuous bone-biting pain. She froze for a moment, the hand patting Mao Mao's neck stopped, her feet were nailed in place, she wanted to move, but she didn't know what to do. Did the Lingsuo not be used by it? Shen Rongjaiu actually spoke first. Because he had just left Jianshan Lake and the lake like purgatory, his tense nerves suddenly relaxed, which made him feel better, and even, looking at Ji Qingzhou is also pleasing to the eye. No. Ji Qingzhou half bent, her long hair cascading down her shoulders, she explained seriously, it doesn't seem to want to wear this. Shen Rongjaihu didn't speak anymore, he only held the sword in his hand, and walked towards the mist of peach blossoms. He walked in front of Ji Qingzhou, and the faint fragrance of the bone-piercing soul entered her nostrils again. Ji Qingzhou's delicate nose wrinkled, she thought the fragrance was very pleasant. Shen Rongjaiu left, Ji Qingzhou turned his head to look at his back, his white clothes were hidden in the thick white mist, with peach-colored petals brushing past. The immortal seekers who are sure have already entered the mist of peach blossoms, and the remaining ones who are hesitating here are mostly thinking about whether to go to the water to find a few more map fragments. Every round of Xuanyunzong's Immortal Seeking Conference, only 20 immortal seekers can pass the test. If these immortal seekers hesitate any longer, and the people in front find the real entrance of Shuiyun Peak, they will have no chance at all. Over there, Chu Mingxiu ordered her maid Yingxiu to search the Jianshan Lake and brought up some map fragments. Even though Yingxiu also had fairy bones, she couldn't even stand firmly after walking twice. This made Ji Qingzhou start to wonder if Shen Rongjaiu was injured by Jianshan Lake just now. If he said no, his knuckles turned white from the pain. If yes, but how could he be so calm? As if sensing Ji Qingzhou's doubts, the system whispered to her, Shen Rongjaiu doesn't have a fairy bone, he is connected to the earth's ghost energy, and the mountains and lakes are clean and flawless, and the most repelling him is that he can't show any painful expression, it's really scary. Ji Qingzhou froze for a moment, her hand touched Mao Mao's back again and again, until finally, she made up her mind to stand up. There is no map, I will go in and have a look, she said to the system. When she came to the mist of peach blossoms, the Xuanyun sect disciple who was guarding here stopped her. Girl, are you sure you want to go in, but you don't have a map in your hand? There are many dangers in the mist of peach blossoms. It's not just as simple as not being able to see the way. The disciple explained seriously to Ji Qingzhou, if you don't have a map to guide you, if you stray into an ambush formation, you don't have a trace of a mortal bone, very may die in it. Ah! Is that so? Ji Qingzhou responded. Yeah, this is the end of you. Isn't it enough to get here? No way, you, a mortal, still want to pass the Ascension to Immortals Conference. Chu Mingxiu's resounding voice rang out, it's too overwhelming. Some. Try to walk. If there is no way to catch up with Shen Ronjiu and get close to him, the energy of the system is exhausted, she will finish the game, and there is still a glimmer of hope in entering the mist of peach blossoms. Unlike Jianshan Lake, Ji Qingzhou couldn't see the danger in the mist of peach blossoms, so she dared to go boldly. Suan Yunzong is really unlucky, you will have to collect your body after you die. Chu Mingxiu took the map fragments that Yingxiu scooped up as her own, and walked into the mist of peach blossoms by herself, without any intention of bringing the maid with her. Yingxiu moved her steps, called princess, and wanted to follow, but Chu Mingxiu's figure had already disappeared. Such an arrogant and selfish person naturally couldn't bear the fact that his maid was also qualified to cultivate immortality. Yingxiu stood there blankly, but Ji Qingzhou was stopped because Suan Yunzong didn't want to collect her body. To ensure safety, you must take out at least one map fragment before you can enter. Suan Yunzong disciple said to Ji Qingzhou. At this time, only Ji Qingzhou and Yingxiu were left on the bank of Jianshan Lake, and Shiratori, who was in charge of providing vision, squatted on the bank and looked at them with his head tilted. Although the words of the princess from Ze Kingdom are thorny, they are true. It should be the end of her life here. Zhang Qunqi commented. Ji Qingzhou had given them enough surprises. She and her donkey were all mortal bodies, and they didn't know how they could resist the washing of Jianshan Lake. Go any further, but every step is dangerous. In this mist of peach blossoms, many immortal seekers have died. How can our Suanyun Sex Gate be so easy to step into? Another elder also echoed, they didn't think that Ji Qingzhou could pass the fairy-seeking conference at all. They all guessed that Ji Qingzhou was about to stop here. However, when Ji Qingzhou was thinking about whether to go back to Jianshan Lake to fish another map fragment, Mao Mao beside her stomped impatiently on the spot. It looks like this, as if it feels a little itchy. The next moment, there was a crash sound, and something fell from Mao Mao's butt. When it went ashore, Mao Mao was wet, but now that it has been ashore for so long, its fur has dried up, and the things that were glued to its body by the water have fallen off. It was a fragment of a map stuck to Mao Mao's at some time, it must have accidentally encountered it in the lake, and the map fragment stuck on it by the way, and it made the old donkey feel uncomfortable. Ji Qingzhou picked up the fragment of the map that fell from Mao Mao's body, held it in both hands, and handed it to the disciple of Suan Yunzong. Look, it's a fragment of the map, can I go in? Disciple of Suanyun sect. Does the one that fell from the donkey count? But the words had already been spoken, so they could only turn around and let Ji Qingzhou enter the mist of peach blossoms. Since this mortal was about to die, they couldn't stop him. Ji Qingzhou was about to walk into the mist with the only map fragment in his hand, but Yingxiu rushed up and grabbed her. Not long ago, she was still by Chu Mingxiu's side, making things difficult for Ji Qingzhou in every possible way. Now that Chu Mingxiu took away all the map fragments and left, she could only stay where she was even though most of the map fragments were from her in Jianshan. Fished from the lake. Ji Qingzhou is the last chance. Can you, take me with you? Yingxiu looked at Ji Qingzhou and said softly. The author has something to say, best of the match. Mao Mao I searched for the question can a donkey swim? Half of the people said the donkey could swim, and half said it couldn't, so I took it for granted. Ji Qingzhou's sleeve was pulled by her. She is not very good at rejecting others, but she has her own special method. That is to pretend not to hear, no matter what Yingxiu says, she can automatically filter her speech. So, Ji Qingzhou only touched Mao Mao's head, then walked towards the mist of peach blossoms. Seeing that she didn't pay attention to him, Yingxiu just gritted her teeth, lowered her head and rushed forward again. She clenched Ji Qingzuo's arm tightly. Ji Qingzhou didn't have the strength to break free from her, his arm was held by her, so he could only stop on the spot and turn his head to look at her. Princess, Princess, most of the map fragments in her hand were caught by me in Jianshan Lake. Yingxiu looked into Ji Qingzuo's eyes and murmured to her, if I can't pass the Immortal Ascension Conference, I'm going back to the palace. Ji Qingzhou tilted her head to look at Yingxiu. She felt that it would be good for Yingxiu to go back to the palace. She wears gold and silver, life is not bad, isn't it? She tried hard, trying to pull her arm back from Yingxiu's hand. But under the unexpected action, the cloth on Yingxiu's wrist wearing the silver jewelry slipped off, revealing her skin. The clanging silver jewelry was more like some kind of shackles. Under the shackles, there were years of scars. The new ones are stacked on top of the old ones, modeled and modeled, so scary. Ji Qingzhou was taken aback for a moment, but Yingxiu quickly pulled down his sleeves to cover his scars, and didn't speak any more. Go in. Ji Qingzhou said to her, but, I only have one. After going in, I'll go by myself. Yingxiu's hand gripped Ji Qingzuo's arm, like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. Ji Qingzuo's fingers were slightly bent, and her brows were slightly wrinkled. She was not used to being so close to people, and her nerves tensed up. But soon, Yingxiu let go, and the silver jewelry on her wrist jingled. Ji Qingzhou looked down at her hand and didn't speak any more. Yingxiu followed her into the mist of peach blossoms. As soon as she entered the mist, Ji Qingzuo's vision was shrouded in layers of mist. She felt that she was in the middle of the sea of clouds, and she couldn't find the direction of east, west, north, south. When she came back to her senses, she and Yingxiu had already stood in a forest, and the surrounding area was still filled with fog, so she couldn't find the exact direction. Yingxiu came back to her senses before she did. Seeing Ji Qingzuo's dizziness caused by the mist, she asked, "It looks dangerous here, should I continue walking with you?" If there is something situation, I should be more capable than you to deal with it." Ji Qingzhou pressed his forehead and shook his head. She was not used to the help of others, and she couldn't accept it when she walked with someone she just met. Yingxiu is just grateful to Ji Qingzhou for bringing her in. If she refuses, she can't insist anymore. She stood still, took a deep look at Ji Qingzhou, thought for a while, and reminded her, "Girl, if you see my princess again, don't say you brought me in." Ji Qingzhou pondered, she probably had no chance of talking to that delicate princess. Yingxiu said goodbye and left. When she left, she clenched her fists, as if she had made up her mind. The white bird that was originally staying on Jianshan Lake also got in, and its eyes recorded the conversation between Ji Qingzhou and Yingxiu just now. The aptitude of Yingxiu's fairy bone is not inferior to that of her master. Zhang Qunqi looked at Yingxiu's figure disappearing in the mist, and couldn't help but sigh, "If you enter the fairy gate, you won't have the power of the emperor among ordinary people." Down. Originally we thought that she was going to the other side of Jianshan Lake to be the limit, but we stumbled into the mist of peach blossoms by mistake. If she promised Yingxiu to walk with her, Yingxiu would be able to protect her to some extent. Zhang Qunqi couldn't help but feel a little bit regrettably, "Next, I don't know how she will live." Of course, Ji Qingzhou didn't think about how to survive. She trimmed under the tree, took out the only map fragment in her hand, and started to study it. The fragment of the map that Mao Mao accidentally brought up was a very crucial piece. Almost unheard of the correct route was drawn, but Ji Qingzhou couldn't understand the messy lines on the map, so she scratched her head. The system reminded her embarrassingly, "Host, the map has been taken down." Ji Qingzhou turned the map over and understood the map. Going west from where she was the real entrance to Shuiyun Peak, but it was not shown on the map for the second half of the journey. She thought, let's go, let's talk when there is no other way. So she led Mao Mao to the west, and the thick fog hid her face. A road opened in front of her eyes, and in the depths of the thick fog, there were occasional strange black shadows passing by. From the dense forest beside Ji Qingzhou, countless vines swish out of the damp bushes. They clamored to entangle Ji Qingzhuo's ankles, and then dragged her into the bushes, devouring her flesh, the body, as the nourishment of the forest. However, the vines just passed over Ji Qingzhuo's toes, and the moment they touched Ji Qingzhou, they exploded into chaotic light spots and disappeared. Like Mao Mao, who was beside Ji Qingzhou, it ran forward cheerfully, crushing the evil vines along the way. Ji Qingzhuo's system did find out, but it was smart, and it was scared to death, but it didn't make a sound to remind Ji Qingzhou. The peach blossom mist is a fantasy land. Here, only a little celestial affinity is required for the immortal, and that celestial affinity can resonate with this illusion, and a wonderful scene will be derived. However, Ji Qingzhou really didn't have any aptitude for cultivating immortals. Playing the piano to a stupid cow, the cow can still hear the sound and barely respond. But if you play the qin against a piece of wood, the wood will only feel that the qin is also wood. Ji Qingzhou is like this. All the difficulties set up in the illusion do not exist for her. They are not in the same channel at all. If she could see these dangers, she would have been too scared to take a step forward. Up. She was walking all the way, and the dangers along the way were ignored by her one by one. This scene made the atmosphere in the hall of Sect Master Xuanyun happy. Ah, Elder Zhang, is this the peach blossom illusion that you have painstakingly studied for hundreds of years? It seems like that. Another elder joked. The study of the formation is not to confuse ordinary people, but, she didn't respond at all, which is really strange. Zhang Qunqi didn't feel any embarrassment, because Ji Qingzhou was so special. But it's okay. Those guarding the depths of the mist of peach blossoms are all monsters I tamed. It's not a lie. It's at the end of her route, he said confidently. Ji Qingzhou walked all the way, and stopped halfway to rest for a while. She took out a water bottle from the luggage on Mao Mao's back, opened it, and drank a few sips. She checked her map, and there was a red dot not far ahead, but she didn't know what it was for. The red dot looks dangerous. Ji Qingzhuo's thinking is very simple, that is to avoid it. She led Mao Mao, turned around and walked another way. According to the original setting of Peach Blossom Mist, if you leave the established route, you will encounter even more terrifying dangers. This is where the importance of the map lies. From the beginning to the end, Ji Qingzhou didn't get into the tense state of participating in the immortal meeting, so she didn't take the map on the donkey seriously at all, and she didn't encounter danger in the forest, so she also became bold. She changed the route without authorization, and the weird monsters that swarmed towards her because of deviation from the route all turned into phantoms one by one. Ji Qingzhou walked for a long time until she saw someone. Since he couldn't see the huge monster, Ji Qingzhou went directly past the illusion of the monster and saw the person at the other end of the dense forest. Shen Rongjaiyu held the sword light was rustling, and cut through the gap under the hard exoskeleton of the monster in front of him, defeating the monster's defense. Like Ji Qingzhou, he can see through the illusions here, he has the ability to ignore them, but he is willing to believe that these monsters are real, so as to fight them he wants to hide himself. Seeing Shen Rongjaiyu, the system urged Ji Qingzhou, hurry up, get closer now, and I will absorb a little more energy. Ji Qingzhou reluctantly moved over. Shen Rongjaiyu didn't see her at all, and there was a monster as tall as a mountain between them. Naturally, Shen Rongjaiyu would not have any pity for a monster that was an illusion. He clenched the sword in his hand tightly, and the magic light rippling on the edge of the sword seemed to contain a way-inspiring righteousness, pure and vast. He struck out with his sword, straight towards the heart of the monster. Originally, when he pierced its heart with his sword, fresh blood would spurt out, as if red rain had fallen from the sky. However, when Ji Qingzhou walked over, she didn't notice that Shen Rongjia was fighting a monster that didn't exist at all, and she didn't understand the killing intent hidden in his swordsmanship at all. She walked under the monster beast and used her body to break the illusion. The mountain-like monster body disappeared like a bubble that had been punctured, and the point where Shen Rongjia's sword pointed was Ji Qingzhou. He clearly had a murderous intent, but Ji Qingzhou was very slow, she couldn't feel his murderous intent. This kind of so-called aura and aura, so mysterious and mysterious in another world, didn't exist for her. However, the sword that Shen Rongjia slammed at her was real. Seeing the cold light on the sword, she was dazed and froze in place. How could she hide? Even though she wanted to hide, her brain moved, but her limbs didn't listen. Her hands and feet were stunned one step ahead of her, and they were nailed in place without moving. Shen Rongjia could have retracted the sword at the moment when the phantom of the monster disappeared. From his line of sight, the monstrous monster as ugly as a mountain disappeared the moment Ji Qingzhou arrived. He originally wanted to see his sword edge cut off the heart of the monster. Such a huge monster, his blood is also red, and after the pulsating blood vessels are cut off, there will be gushes of blood that will dye the surroundings red. However, because of Ji Qingzhou's appearance, the picture he wanted disappeared. She took her stupid and froze in place. Shen Rongjia saw her close her eyes, her slender eyelashes trembled slightly, and her body trembled slightly because of fear. She is still like this, a dead piece of rotten wood, Shen Rongjia thought, kill her now, the blood overflowing from her neck should also flow carefully. It's boring, if she dies like this, it's too boring. The edge of Shen Rongjia's sword deflected, his tiger's mouth cracked, but there was no blood, and the forcefully reversed sword edge bounced back to his body, but he didn't feel the pain coming from the tiger's mouth. The cold sword brushed against Ji Qingzhou's neck, Ji Qingzhou's eyes widened, she felt as if someone had patted a handful of snow on her neck, it was extremely cold. Her whole body's nerves were already tense because of Shen Rongjia's bullying sword, but now, the sudden passing of the sword light made her tremble all over, as if it broke her tense nerves. Because of the unstoppable force of the sword, Shen Rongjia's tall figure pressed down on Ji Qingzhou. Not far behind Ji Qingzhou, there was an old tree. At this time, the snow-white sword's edge sank into the tree, and Shen Rongjia's perfect face like cold jade approached Ji Qingzhou. The tip of their noses touched, and then they bounced off immediately. Shen Rongjia supported him with the sword in his hand, and Ji Qingzhou smelled the faint fragrance again, which made her dizzy and her consciousness sank. She was not used to such a close distance, and the sudden tension made her breathe a sigh of relief, and then the tension flooded up like a tide. Ji Qingzhou's breathing was shallow, even cautious. The next moment, she closed her eyes and her body softened. Shen Rongjia supported her with one hand, her body was very light, and her waist hidden under the loose robe was also thin, as if it could be broken if pinched. He was sure she was fainted by him. The author has something to say, Shen Rongjia in the past, she is just a piece of stupid wood. Later Shen Rongjia, I hate that you are a piece of wood. Shen Rongjia guessed right, Ji Qingzhou was indeed fainted by fright. When Shen Rongjia's sword flew straight towards her after breaking through the phantom of the monster, her system also became tense. Host, please hide yourself, I don't have the energy to help you. However, even if the system said so, it knew that Ji Qingzhou couldn't dodge at such a close distance. From the beginning to the end, Ji Qingzhou only had the fear of imminent death, but this system was very excited. When Shen Rongjia deflected the blade away, it excitedly said to Ji Qingzhou, the host is amazing, he didn't kill you. While it was rambling, it didn't notice that Ji Qingzhou hadn't answered it anymore. All Ji Qingzhou's thoughts were broken at the moment when Shen Rongjia's body was pressed down. Damn it, is she really scared? His sword, so sharp, just flew past her skin. Her body softened, and she simply chose not to face it. The moment before her consciousness disappeared, she felt someone supporting her waist. Ji Qingzhou was not used to the feeling of being held in someone else's arms, so she quickly woke up. When she woke up, Shen Rongjie had already thrown her on Mao Mao's back. Mao Mao was used to carrying heavy loads all his life, so carrying Ji Qingzhou on his back was really not a difficult task. Mao Mao just carried Ji Qingzhou on his back, lowered his head, and ate the grass leaves on the ground leisurely, chewing quite vigorously. Shen Rongjie didn't even leave. He sat on the blue stone not far away, lowered his eyes, and wiped the snow-white long sword in his hand. The blade was as bright as snow, reflecting the sunlight, giving it a clear and flawless texture. After waking up, Ji Qingzhou slid off Mao Mao's back, and she fell to the ground. The grass blades were soft, and she didn't feel any pain when she fell. She rubbed her eyes, then turned her head to look at Shen Rongjie. "Thank you," she blurted out, got up from the ground, and wiped off the grass leaves on the hem of her clothes. Shen Rongjie sat under a ray of light that leaked from the forest, making his skin white, like an innocent immortal. He raised his eyes, put the sword back into its sheath, and the sword clanged loudly, and he asked, "Thank you for what?" "You, removed the sword." Ji Qingzhou's attention was always in a strange place. She didn't dare to look into Shen Rongjie's eyes, but looked at his hands, his feet, and other parts of his body. She noticed a scar on the tiger's mouth of his sword-holding hand, but it was strange, the scar was bloodless, more like dry paper being torn open. "Your hand." Ji Qingzhou guessed that he was injured because of moving the sword. "No problem." Shen Rongjie's voice was calm and unwavering. "Then I'll go first." Ji Qingzhou said goodbye to him. The system couldn't hear these words. "It's hard to come across, you just let it go." Ji Qingzhou doesn't want to stay by Shen Rongjie's side, his unique aura is too compelling, it's hard for her to stay calm around him. It has nothing to do with whether Shen Rongjie is a villain, it's simply that Ji Qingzhou is not used to being with strangers people together. Shen Rongjie didn't speak. To some extent, he and Ji Qingzhou were extremely quiet people. In the forest, there are only the rustling sound of the wind blowing the leaves, the sound of insects, and the occasional sound of two people rubbing their clothes. This scene is actually somewhat harmonious. They were still in the fair of seeking immortals, and they were still competitors, so Ji Qingzhou felt that it was inappropriate for him to stay by Shen Rongjie's side. She patted Mao Mao's neck, "Let's go. The monster guarding the formation is real." Shen Rongjie's voice sounded coolly behind her. When Ji Qingzhou heard it, goosebumps all over her body, she turned her head slowly, and asked Shen Rongjie, "Are there any fake ones? Can't you see it?" Shen Rongjie remembered, when Ji Qingzhou got close to the monster phantom, the phantom disappeared. She didn't seem to believe in anything false, not even to deceive herself. "It's the forest." Ji Qingzhou scratched his head, "Where are there other monsters?" Shen Rongjie didn't tell her the truth. If Ji Qingzhou fainted again, he wouldn't have time to stay here. He didn't talk to Ji Qingzhou anymore, he just left with his sword in his hand, because he felt that he might still see Ji Qingzhou at the finish line. Ji Qingzhou also knew that it would not be good for her to follow him any longer, so she took Mao Mao and left. After walking for a while, she found that she seemed to have come to the border of the map. No matter how much she went around, she couldn't get around the red dot. Helpless, she could only walk towards the red dot marked on the map. Seeing her like this, the elders who observed the situation in the formation felt a little helpless. "What kind of monster is placed on her route?" An elder said thoughtfully, although she insisted on going her own way, "It is a bit ashamed to let a mortal die here. It's the white python I tamed in the purple serene forest." Zhang Qunqi replied, "Among the many monsters, she has a milder temperament, but her combat effectiveness is not bad." This. The elders all sighed. Even though the other immortal seekers performed well, they still couldn't help but focus on Ji Qingzhou. She was really out of tune with everything around her, and she didn't seem to be cultivating immortals at all, but unexpectedly, she came to the second half of the Immortal Seeking Conference. Among the elders who were interested in Ji Qingzhou, only one remained silent. He was tall and tall, a head taller than the surrounding male monks. There was a gleam of determination in the drooping eyes. If Ji Qingzhou were here, he would definitely give him a very appropriate evaluation. He looks like he can play very well. Yeduanhong, the elder of Xuanyunzong who seemed to be able to fight, looked at Ji Qingzhou in the water mirror and gave a light snort, and commented, "Opportunistic waste." Of course, Ji Qingzhou couldn't hear what others said about her. She quickly came to the place where the white python lived. After getting here, she finally didn't touch the invisible barrier. It seems that only by following the map can she find the real world. Sport. She only saw blades of grass fluttering in front of her, but did not see the white python. Then, there was a scream, and Ji Qingzhou couldn't help covering her ears. The old donkey who was following her was also frightened, and stomped on the ground in a panic. In the forest, the white python's tail wrapped around a person's body, throwing her straight onto a thick tree trunk. The eyes of the gentle-tempered white python are like orange light bulbs, staring very wide, and the wildness in the eyes cannot be concealed. It has not tasted the breath of human beings for a long time. The one thrown to the tree trunk by it was Chu Mingxiu, who had just met before. She screamed, but she couldn't break free from the entanglement of the white python. Ji Qingzhou was stunned again, and when she realized it, she was already holding Mao Mao and wanted to run away. Forget it, it doesn't matter if she doesn't participate in the Immortal Seeking Conference, she doesn't want to die so soon. She finally had a general impression of the monster guarding the formation that Shen Rongjaihu said. Is this something that ordinary people can beat? As soon as she had this idea, Chu Mingxiu reacted. She gritted her teeth, her eyes showed killing intent. From under her sleeves, the cold light of a dagger shone. The color cast in the cold light was greenish, obviously poisonous. Chu Mingxiu is the princess of the Zi kingdom in the Yun's region, and she can find a way to collect some rare treasures belonging to monks. The dagger was inserted between the scales of the white python. Ji Qingzhou turned her face away. Without looking again, she lowered her head, and looked at Mao Mao. She dragged Mao Mao to run, but Mao Mao panicked even more. It broke away from Ji Qingzhou's hand and rushed straight towards the white python. Ji Qingzhou had no choice but to catch up. Over there, Chu Mingxiu wounded the white python, and countless attack spells bombarded its body, making a loud noise, and the white python writhed painfully on the ground. The strange thing is that such a huge monster was struggling, its out-of-control body and the fallen rocks did not touch Ji Qingzhou at all. She doesn't have a fairy bone, so she doesn't exist in the eyes of the white python. If Chu Mingxiu didn't draw its attention here, maybe the white python could notice Ji Qingzhou, but it was too busy fighting with Chu Mingxiu, so it just ignored Ji Qingcut. Of course, Ji Qingzhou and Mao Mao had an extremely miraculous positioning, and Mao Mao panicked and rushed forward in a panic, avoiding all the attacks of the white python. It ran forward, Ji Qingzhou chased after her, and soon the injured tail of the white python fell heavily behind her. The broken scales were still stained with blood. The powerful tail slapped the ground, breaking the cracks in the ground and shaking the rocks to the ground, but all of this had nothing to do with Ji Qingzhou, because she miraculously avoided these attacks. Mao Mao dashed left and right, his figure was surprisingly agile. Ji Qingzhou was out of breath after chasing it. She didn't dare to look back, she was afraid that her legs would weaken if she looked at it. Some things, as long as you pretend not to see it, then it does not exist. Behind her, Chu Mingxiu was struggling with the white python, but she didn't realize that a man and a donkey had slipped past in the middle, because the fight between her and the white python was too loud, and anyone who could cross it would be considered I have the patience. Finally, Ji Qingzhou escaped from the attacking range of the white python, and she jumped straight forward, onto Mao Mao, pressing it to stop running around. This donkey! Zhang Qunqi couldn't calm down anymore, he never thought it would end like this. Ji Qingzhou only needs to go a little further to find the real entrance of Shuiyun Peak, but what did she do? She just walked through the mist of peach blossoms once, and she didn't encounter any test at all. Is this reasonable? This donkey is normal. It is very old and dying, and its eyesight is not very good. Another Swan Yunzong elder who claimed to be an expert in spiritual beast research pushed the crystal mirror on his face, speaking in an academic tone said. Its predictive ability is not a normal donkey, is it? Zhang Qunqi couldn't believe it. It's really normal, even if it's made into a donkey meat hot pot, because it's too old, it will cost more firewood. The elder replied. Elder Zhang, we have to face a problem. He said to Zhang Qunqi again, our Swan Yunzong's ascension to immortal conference requires a complete mortal who has no trace of immortality to pass. Do I need to contact the head? Zhang Qunqi pinched his eyebrows helplessly. Let's talk to the sect master about this matter, we can't decide whether Swan Yunzong should accept such a disciple. Another elder spoke. Such a waste, just throw it down the mountain. Yeduan Hong, who had originally disliked Ji Qingzhou, said coldly. Ji Qingzhou walked forward again, and she saw a fresh breath in front of her. At the end of the foggy road, there was a waterfall. She walked into the waterfall, and felt weightless. She seemed to be transported by something. Gone. This feels like riding an elevator. Ji Qingzhou came back to her senses. She found that she was in a huge white jade square, and there were already a few immortal seekers sitting in the distance, not many, but their aura was not bad, and Shen Rongjia was among them. Judging by the position, he came here first. And Meng Yaolin, the eldest lady of the Meng family she noticed not long ago, was only standing not far below Shen Rongjia. She didn't look at herself, but frowned at Shen Rongjia, as if questioning how many times he had been practicing in Swan Yunzong. No matter how the Tenier disciple came to participate in the Immortal Ascension Conference to her first place. Of course, when she arrived, some people noticed her later. At first they thought her appearance was nothing strange, but after noticing her immortal bone aptitude, all the immortal seekers present were stunned. The author has something to say, a temporary ranking of combat power, Mao Mao system Ji Qingzhou. Are you kidding me? A mortal actually passed the Immortal Seeking Conference and stood with them? When almost everyone's eyes were cast on her, Ji Qingzhou was at a loss. She was afraid of these eyes, but the Baihu square was empty, where could she hide? Helpless, she could only use a little effort to hide behind Mao Mao. She felt that the 2 coins she spent back then were too worthwhile. However, her Mao Mao is not used to such a scene, an old donkey who has been blindfolded for most of his life, how can he see the bright white jade square? So Ji Qingzhou backed away from it, and Mao Mao backed away in panic. 1 man and 1 donkey were so meek, they actually wanted to leave Baihu Square. Meng Yaolin, who was standing in the center of the immortal seekers who had already been promoted, even though she was no longer interested in foreign things, she turned her head at this moment, wanting to see who caused the commotion. Ji Qingzhou was a small person, very inconspicuous on the edge of the huge Baihu Square. Meng Yaolin squinted her eyes and couldn't see her appearance clearly. Shen Rongjia held the sword in one hand, and his eyes seemed to drift over Ji Qingzhou inadvertently. When Ji Qingzhou had no choice but to retreat, he lazily said, "A person who seeks immortality, is he so impatient? He has a special status in Swan Yunzong." So just after he finished speaking, the immortal seekers present realized how impolite their eyes were. Ji Qingzhou had already retreated to the edge of the field at this time. At this time, someone was passing through the waterfall and came here, and she bumped into a person directly on the back. Get out! The person behind wanted to push Ji Qingzhou away, but after fighting with the guarding monsters just now, she had no strength left. Ji Qingzhou turned his head and met Shang Mingxiu's impatient gaze. Seeing her, Chu Mingxiu raised her voice aggressively, "How did you get here as a mortal? When you were fighting the white python, I ran over. Ji Qingzhou confessed honestly. You picked my tricks. Chu Mingxiu couldn't believe it. She questioned Suan Yunzong's fairness for the umpteenth time. Suan Yunzong, is this how you set up the Immortal Seeking Conference? Of course, the elders in the main hall of the sect also felt that Ji Qingzhou was able to come here due to luck, but in all fairness, defeating the White Python was very easy for a seeker with a fairy bone, but in that chaotic it is even more difficult to cross the battlefield unscathed during the attack. Even if any of the immortal seekers present were asked to do the same thing as Ji Qingzhou, they would not be able to do it. From this point of view, Ji Qingzhou passed the Immortal Ascension Conference without any moisture, but anyone with a discerning eye knows that she was brought here by an old donkey, but what can be done? That old donkey is her. It was bought for 2 renminbi, and it belongs to her. Therefore, after receiving the instructions from the elders, the Suan Yunzong disciples only nodded to Chu Mingxiu and said, "Girl, there is nothing wrong with the setup of our Immortal Ascension Conference, and she did not cheat. I defeated the White Python." Chu Mingxiu tugged on Ji Qingzhou's sleeve, preventing her from leaving. Ji Qingzhou was a little helpless. She thought about the rules of the Immortal Ascension Conference and didn't say that she couldn't run away, and she was tired of chasing Mao Mao. If it was her own wish, she would have left right now, but she still had a task to do. "Girl, this is Suan Yunzong, the final decision depends on what our elders want." The disciple of Suan Yunzong bowed and said politely. Chu Mingxiu still tugged at Ji Qingzhou's sleeve. Ji Qingzhou tugged twice, but failed to pull back his sleeve. Since she couldn't talk back, she didn't talk anymore. So when Chu Mingxiu saw that no one was paying attention to her and was about to walk to the center of Baihu Square, she found Ji Qingzhou following her step by step. "What are you doing?" Chu Mingxiu frowned and said, "Stay away from me." Ji Qingzhou pointed to the sleeve she was pulling. Chu Mingxiu immediately let go, her brows were furrowed, and she said loudly to Ji Qingzhou, "It is impossible for the Suanyun sect to accept a disciple who does not have the aptitude of immortal bones. Even if you come here, you will be kicked out. If you want to get out, just get out. Anyway, she has done the task according to the system, and if she can't do it, she can't be blamed." Ji Qingzhou only gave a low hum and hid behind the crowd. Not long after Chu Mingxiu arrived, Yingxiu also came to Baihu Square with her head down. After noticing Yingxiu's existence, Chu Mingxiu stared at her with a perplexed expression. Originally, Yingxiu wanted to stand far away from Chu Mingxiu, but Chu Mingxiu hooked her finger at her, and she actually walked to Chu Mingxiu's side. Seeing this scene, the system couldn't help feeling sorry for Ji Qingzhou. Her master is like this, and this maid actually wants to follow her. Ji Qingzhou didn't notice these two people. She glanced at Chu Mingxiu and Yingxiu, and was also a little confused, but these had nothing to do with her. Because the system has enough energy, it didn't urge Ji Qingzhou to approach Shen Rongjaiu, and Ji Qingzhou was happy to stand alone in a corner in a daze. After 20 people arrived, all the formations leading to Baihu Square were closed. Of the immortal seekers who came up on the cloud boat, only 3 people passed through. Besides Ji Qingzhou, they were Chu Mingxiu and Ying Ying. 1 master and 1 servant, this is the most in the previous Immortal Seeking Conference, and the remaining 17 people are all descendants of those immortal cultivating families. Just when Ji Qingzhou changed the center of gravity of his left and right feet for the 26th time to stand, the white jade square under their feet flew up like a disc. It turned out that this was also a huge flying magic weapon, driven by the array set at the bottom. Baihu Square ascended to the sky, leaving Shuiyun Peak, until it slowly rose. Ji Qingzhou saw the whole picture of Shuiyun Peak clearly. This is the most hazy and beautiful mountain in the entire Suanyun sect, with mountains and mist on it surrounding the mountains. Peach blossoms are planted on the top of the mountain, hidden in the mist, beautiful and mysterious. The flying white jade square led them to the main hall of the sect, climbed the towering high steps, and entered the hall. These immortal seekers were a little surprised when they saw the huge water mirror placed in the hall. The elders paid attention to it. At this time, the elders in the palace finally contacted the head of the Xuanyun sect. Those who came here to watch the Immortal Ascension Conference were all elders who were interested in accepting disciples recently. The head did not intend to accept disciples, so they did not attend. But there was such an accident as Ji Qingzhou, Zhang Qunqi and the others had no choice but to contact the head to make a decision. They didn't plan to hide the conversation with the head of the sect from these immortal seekers. After all what happened, they had to give an explanation to everyone present. At this time, Ji Qingzhou didn't know that they contacted the head of the sect and she had something to do with her. She was still sitting in the corner, lowering her head to tidy up the messy hair on Mao Mao's body, and patiently combed it one by one. A small water mirror appeared in front of everyone. Yin Muchen, the head of Xuanyun sect, was in the middle of an island, and someone was playing chess with her. "Master, Elder Yu, are you there too?" Sitting opposite Yin Muchen was another elder in the Xuanyun sect, Yu Sukong. Yu Sukong was the most withdrawn elder in the Xuanyun sect. Some people have seen him accept disciples, but this person's cultivation base is frighteningly high, and it is said that he is not under the head of the sect. "What's the matter?" Yin Muchen nodded slightly. She had the demeanor of a cultivator, with a good appearance and majesty in her eyebrows. "A mortal past our immortal meeting," Zhang Qunqi said helplessly. Yin Muchen chuckled lightly. Didn't he be stopped by Jianshan Lake? Jianshan Lake water can't harm her. This is what Zhang Qunqi was most puzzled about. "Where is the peach blossom illusion that you are most proud of, Qunqi?" Yin Muchen asked again. She also passed, but she couldn't see the illusory monsters in my illusion. Zhang Qunqi sighed helplessly. "Where are the monsters guarding the formation?" Yin Muchen was very patient. When others were attacking monsters, she ran over. Zhang Qunqi was really confused. Any link in this could kill Ji Qingzhou. Why was she unscathed? "It's all here, so what's the problem?" Yin Muchen was still playing chess with Yu Sukong. She held the chess piece between two fingers, and landed on the chessboard, looking a little hesitant. "I don't agree." Ye Duanhong, who had already had a problem with Ji Qingzhou, opened her mouth. "She obviously came here by luck. Besides, we don't need to accept a mortal in the door, they have no way to learn from the door Taoism." At the beginning, the desolation was a disaster for the world of cultivating immortals. How many monks lives and what price were paid by our orthodox sect to seal it, and even Ranjaihu's family Dongshan royal family was completely wiped out, although the desolation is now forever. There is no way to get ahead, but we can't relax. The Xiaoxian sect can't be so childish and accept such waste. Ye Duanhong hates Ji Qingzhou, naturally he has his reasons. "Duanhong, be careful, the erosion has been sealed by Master Yuan Yu, there will be no such evil in the world of cultivating immortals." Yin Muchen shook his head. "However, Duanhong is right. Real mortals can't resist the waters of Jianshan Lake, even our Xuanyun sect can't find it." Yin Muchen, who is called Duan Shui Master, said with a smile to Zhang Qunqi, "Okay, Qunqi, let me see her." Zhang Qunqi moved the water mirror over to face Ji Qingzhou. Ji Qingzhou suddenly raised his head, looked at Yin Muchen in the water mirror, his eyes fell on her shoulder, and everyone's eyes fell on her again. "She's a pretty girl." Yin Muchen's voice was soft and sweet. "She's also an undoubted mortal." While they were talking, it was obvious that such a bizarre thing had happened, but Yu Sukong, who was playing against Yin Muchen, was still so engrossed in the game that he didn't even lift his head. When the elders and immortal seekers present looked at Ji Qingzhou, Meng Yaolin finally saw Ji Qingzhou's appearance clearly. Her beautiful eyebrows were slightly raised, and a gleam of surprise flashed in the depths of her eyes. Ji Qingzhou dodged, trying to hide behind the pillar, but was grabbed by Chu Mingxiu. "Why are you running away? You came here by cheating, now you dare not admit it." "The princess from Ziguo, be careful." Yin Muchen's chess fell on the board. She thought for a while, and made a decision. "Well, anyway, it should be time for you elders to choose disciples. If you are selected by the elders, you are a direct disciple. If there is no fate, you are an ordinary disciple. After a few years of experience in the sect and waiting for the opportunity, the treatment for direct disciples and ordinary disciples is naturally different. Yin Muchen held his chin and he came up with a perfect solution. All the elders present, if any of you feel that you can teach her, you can take her away. If not, you can only take this girl away from Xuanyunzong. I'm sorry, girl, you really can't learn Xuanyunzong's Taoism. Yin Muchen smiled helplessly at Ji Qingzhou, although we don't know why you came here, although the immortal journey is attractive, but it's also dangerous, and it's for your safety. Ji Qingzhou let out a long breath, she nodded without any objection. Ji Qingzhou doesn't care whether someone is willing to accept her as an apprentice, she has really worked hard, and as for the result she can get, it has nothing to do with her. She pursed her lips, and when Chu Mingxu wasn't paying attention, she pulled her hand back. She didn't dare to hide, but she also didn't dare to meet the eyes of these immortal seekers. They looked at her as if they were looking at an opportunistic cheater. Ji Qingzhou could only avoid everyone's eyes, and looked in the direction of the only person who didn't look at her. It was Shen Rongjie. After he passed the immortal seeking conference, he didn't need to stay among them and wait for the elders to pick them up, because he came here with the token of Master Yuan Wu, and his master was naturally that very senior Yuan Wu real person. He didn't look at Ji Qingzhou, just lowered his head, and patiently wiped the long sword in his hand, with blue hair hanging down his shoulders, looking calm. Master, you too. Zhang Qunqi didn't think that Ji Qingzhou could join the Xuanyun sect deep in his heart, but he felt that the proposal of the master was very reasonable. Since no one is willing to teach Ji Qingzhou this rotten wood, then it is reasonable to take her away from Xuanyunzong, otherwise, if ordinary disciples fail the examination, she will still be expelled from Xuanyunzong. Xuanyunzong, not anyone can come if they want to. Is there an elder? Yin Muchen asked. The elders in the main hall of the sect were silent. How could they accept a mortal without the slightest bone as a disciple? If they can't teach her, it will also damage their reputation. No more. Zhang Qunqi said to Yin Muchen after waiting for a stick of incense. If the girl still wants to stay in the Xuanyun sect, it's not impossible. It's just that after 3 years of entry, there will be a door-to-door assessment, and the door-to-door assessment is not as simple as peach blossom illusion. Yin Muchen said to Ji Qingzhou explained the reason. At that time, there will be no disciples of Xuanyun sect guarding him. If you fail to pass the examination in the sect, you will not be able to stay in Xuanyun sect. After all, it is Yunzai's largest sect of cultivating immortals, and the rules of this sect are also extremely strict. Is it true that no elder is willing to accept her as an apprentice? Yin Muchen confirmed again. The hall was silent, no one answered. Ji Qingzhou was finally not nervous, she was thinking about whether she should hold back and wait until the entrance examination before leaving. But soon, there was the sound of chess pieces falling on the board, and someone raised his head in the water mirror. Yu Sukong kept his head down and his eyes half down. He was obsessed with the chess game, and at this moment, he seemed to wake up. Elder, what elder? I should be an elder too, right? Yu Sukong raised his head, frowning slightly. He has a pair of extremely clear and beautiful eyes, and there is a clear light blue in the bottom of his eyes, which makes him have a kind of unfamiliarity with the world. In a sense. Sukong, you still remember that you are an elder? Yin Muchen chuckled lightly. Yet. Yu Sukong planned to just take a casual look, but when he saw Ji Qingzhou, he was taken aback. Is this the mortal? Yu Sukong asked. Yes. Yin Muchen said with a smile. No one wants her. Yu Sukong asked again. No one. Yin Muchen seemed to have noticed something, she hesitated to speak. Then I'll accept it. Yu Sukong said, his tone was understated, as if he had made a very ordinary decision. Sukong, Really? Yin Muchen was a little surprised. Seriously? Yu Sukong resumed playing chess. Ji Qingzhou was so inexplicable, she was stunned by the addition of a master, and felt a sense of illusory unreality. It will take 10 years before you can leave here and refine your magic weapon. Yin Muchen reminded. I remember that Rong Yu is temporarily staying in my cave, so let him take it with him. As for how to teach it, it is my business. Yu Sukong had already arranged everything clearly. At the beginning, Shen Rongjia worshipped Suan Yunzong as a disciple of Master Yuan Wu, but the cave belonging to Master Yuan Wu and the sect was an independent space that could not be opened. Yu Sukong, who happened to leave Suan Yunzong to refine magic weapons, was also alone, so he left his residence to Shen Rongjia. The system was startled when it heard this, and it secretly said to Ji Qingzhou, Host, what kind of luck is this? Before Ji Qingzhou could react, he somehow became Shen Rongjia's roommate. Is there still such an operation? Ji Qingzhou accepted his arrangement, and some of the remaining immortal seekers were picked up by the elders. One of the elders wanted to take Yingxiu away, but Chu Ming Swafiai grabbed Yingxiu and refused to let her leave. In the end, the elder could only accept the two together. There is also Meng Yalan, who is the most powerful among the immortal seekers besides Shen Rongjia. The original head Yin Muchen was also interested in her, but at the same time Zhang Qunqi also threw an olive branch at her. Among the two of them, Meng Yalan actually chose Zhang Qunqi, who was inferior in cultivation and status to Yin Muchen. In this way, the disciples who were picked away went to their caves with their masters, and the remaining disciples were led by an elder to the residence of ordinary disciples. Ji Qingzhou didn't know where Yu Sukong's cave was at all, and no one came to look for her. Yu Sukong had no other disciples in the sect. Unlike other sects, there were all brothers, sisters, and uncles, and it was lively. She didn't mind either, so she led Mao Mao and followed the crowd. It's just a coincidence that Ye Duanhong is in charge of leading the new disciples, that fierce elder who looks capable of fighting. She followed behind the crowd, and Ye Duanhong stopped her involuntarily. What are you doing? Elder Yu. Ji Qingzhou was not used to the intimate address of master, so he blurted out an honorific title. This is your master. If you don't recognize him as your master, then leave Suanyun sect as soon as possible. Ye Duanhong interrupted her. Ye Duanhong belongs to Mujiang, and Yu Sukong has a high level of cultivation and strength, and he admires him, but it doesn't mean that he will give Ji Qing a good look. I don't know where my master's cave is. Ji Qingzhou thought, even if she went to the company, there would still be an HR to guide her on the job. If you don't know, go find it by yourself. What are you doing with ordinary disciples? Ye Duanhong sneered. He didn't know why Yu Sukong was so blind. Oh! Ji Qingzhou responded, and stood still, watching Ye Duanhong lead a group of disciples away. She wondered if she had to be cheeky to follow. At this time, there was the sound of wind blowing by her ears, and a person landed beside her. She sniffed and smelled a nice fragrance. It was Shen Rongjia. He held the sword and stood beside her. Both of them had dry and quiet personalities. Ji Qingzhou didn't speak, and Shen Rongjia was also silent. It was more like a stalemate, until Shen Rongjia spoke first. You actually stayed. I didn't expect that I could stay. Ji Qingzhou said this sincerely, like an outsider who stumbled into a strange world by mistake. She never thought that she could also come to some sect of cultivating immortals. Her lifelong wish is clearly to be able to sleep until she wakes up naturally. Elder Yu's cave is in the center of Suanyun sect, on the island in the center of Hughes. Shen Rongjia said, he has lived there for decades. He never thought that he could have another neighbor. Yu Sukong didn't seem like someone who would accept disciples. Okay, thank you. Ji Qingzhou led Mao Mao, and she planned to follow the current to find the lake. Shen Rongjia looked at her with her head down, walking step by step. Although the steps were not firm, they were serious. A very strange man, he thought. Although Ji Qingzhou knew that Shen Rongjaiyu also lived there, she never thought about the possibility of going there with Shen Rongjaiyu. But Shen Rongjaiyu moved closer. Let's go. He came to her side, his calm voice was very nice, but it didn't contain the slightest emotion. Let's go. Ji Qingzhou raised his head, a little confused. I'll take you there. After all, he was defeated. The sword in his hand flew out, and he stepped on the edge of the sword. Ji Qingzhou was still in a daze. Shen Rongjaiyu had already held her wrist, and under his fingertips, an invisible air current was still spinning. Ji Qingzhou was dragged onto the flying sword by him. She didn't dare to lower her head this time, because under the edge of the sword was the rising scenery, and she was afraid of heights. Mao Mao was more panicked than she was, but Shen Rongjaiyu had quick eyesight and quick hands, and threw a piece of cloth over Mao Mao's eyes. It couldn't see, so it wasn't afraid anymore. But Shen Rongjaiyu didn't throw a piece of cloth to her. Ji Qingzhou raised his other hand that wasn't held by Shen Rongjaiyu, and covered his eyes. In the darkness, she heard Shen Rongjaiu's voice drifting past her ears, and went straight into her ears. You don't look like someone who seeks immortality. Shen Rongjaiyu said. He could see that Ji Qingzhou was extremely resistant to all this, and she was also out of tune with everything around her. Where did Ji Qingzhou come to seek immortality? She clearly came to pursue Shen Rongjaiyu. This is how she has the nerve to say it. Under the white palm covering her eyes, her face turned red and her breathing became disordered. Because the idea of pursuing Shen Rongjaiyu made her feel very embarrassed, and besides, he was beside her. Shen Rongjaiyu lowered his head slightly. He saw the wind passing by Ji Qingzhou's ear, and the tip of her ear was slightly red. Soon, he seemed to realize something, and quickly let go of Ji Qingzhou's hand. He had never felt love, nor did he feel that there was anything wrong with this action, but Ji Qingzhou's reaction made him misunderstand. No one was pulling Ji Qingzhou. She panicked even more, but she didn't dare to touch Shen Rongjaiyu again. She just twisted the corners of her clothes, moved her fingers uneasily, and her figure was precarious. The fairy embroidered on Shen Rongjaiu's sleeve fluttered slightly, as if it had come to life. He held Ji Qingzhou's wrist again, and there was a shallow airflow between them. Such a distance would not make Ji Qingzhou feel uneasy. It's so strange. Originally he didn't want to touch people, but now he seemed to take care of Ji Qingzhou's emotions. Sorry, Shen Rongjaiyu, I'm a little afraid of heights. Ji Qingzhou sincerely apologized to Shen Rongjaiyu. It's not unusual for everyone to know Shen Rongjaiu's name, but Ji Qingzhou's name doesn't seem to be referring to a fellow student. But she really didn't know what to call him. After a while, Shen Rongjaiu's voice sounded again, like a clear spring flowing past his ears. I started 30 years earlier than you. He said, you and I can be regarded as the same door. Okay. Ji Qingzhou understood, brother from the same sect, right? Brother from the same sect, what if there is another senior brother from Xuanyunzong in front of you? Shen Rongjaiyu originally wanted Ji Qingzhou to call him something normal, such as senior brother Shen or something. However, Ji Qingzhou's brain circuit is unmatched by anyone. Sometimes she speaks without thinking. Soon, she blurted out and said the title that she thinks is the most appropriate. Okay, Brother Xiaoyu. She said. Shen Rongjaiyu. He still held her wrist and did not let go. It was the first time someone called him by such a strange title. Xiaoyu, what a ridiculous name, he thought.